Hey guys, welcome to my genetic disorder project presentation. So my genetic disorder is HHT, which is hereditary hemorrhagic telangiectasia. Forgive me for my pronunciation. So some characteristics. So HHT is a genetic disorder that affects the blood vessels and how blood flows via arteriovenous malformations. So arterious arteriovenous malformations, they refer to the disruption of blood flow from an irregular connection of arteries and veins. Now, in a normal circulatory system, blood that is pumped by the heart into the arteries travel at a high pressure to reach and supply the blood tissues. But obviously, for function and structure, at a lower pressure when it reaches the capillaries. Now, in HHT, it causes the blood to travel at a high pressure, flowing directly into the veins rather than the capillaries. So some symptoms as a result of this include hemorrhaging or shunting of blood. And due to arteriovenous malformations, it may cause the high blood pressure flow from arteries directly into the veins, which this elevated blood pressure contributes to the enlargement of blood vessels and bleeding. So when people who have chronic or very frequent nosebleeds, it can be a clinical indication of HHT. And now when HHT forms near the surface of the skin, the red marks that are formed are called telangiectasia, which is part of it, the disorder's name. Next, just some quick history. So the origin of the nomenclature or the name of the disorder, it is also referred to as Osler-Weber-Rendu syndrome, which actually, just coming from its name, can bring some background information about the genetic disorder itself. So in 1896, Henry Rendu, he differentiated this order from hemophilia, which is another similar disorder. And then following the progression of scientific research, William Osler established HHT as an inherited disorder. As it's an inherited disorder, which I'm going to be talking more about the mode of the inheritance in the next few slides. But William Osler, he connected the diseases prevalence in the families. So this is when HHT became recognized as an inherited disorder. And finally, Frederick Weber was very crucial in spreading awareness and information of HHT. So the consolidation of these three scientists and researchers, along with additional key figures, they resulted in HHT being referred to as the Osler-Weber-Rendu syndrome. And just the prevalence. So for HHT, it's estimated that 1 in 5,000 to 1 to 10,000 people worldwide are affected. And it is underdiagnosed, and it is it's recommended that for early prevention or intervention, that HHT gets diagnosed earlier on, because as we know, it can affect organs, which can have some dire implications to that depending on your age, which is a risk factor. And so the earlier you diagnose HHT, the better. But it affects more than 1 million people worldwide. So as you can see, here are some pictures of the symptoms and the characteristics of HHT, the red marks that I was talking about. and also the nosebleed, hemorrhaging, the blood shunting. That is really just captured by these four pictures. Next, I'm going to be talking more about the molecular cause of the disorder. So the genes primarily responsible for HHT are they include mutations in the endoglin in the chromosome 9, which is type 1, and the actin receptor-like kinase in chromosome 12, which is type 2. Now, type 1 mutations is characterized by the increased frequency of pulmonary arteriovenous malformations, which I discussed earlier. And then type 2 involves less pulmonary malformations, but more hepatic lesions. And what that means is lesions that are related to the liver. And so HHT, it is caused by mutations in 5 different genes, but there are likely more genes that are yet to be discovered. So there's more information on the exact molecular cause and the mechanism, rather. They're still yet to be uncovered. But while the exact mechanism of HHT mutation influence is not yet clear, it is likely that they disrupt a balance between pro and antianogenic signals in blood vessels, which what that means is that they are involved in the growth of new blood vessels. So the regulation of that is contributes to the mechanism of the disorder. Okay, so yeah, just here's a picture of basic anatomy from of blood flow and of vessels, and and this reinforces how HHT with the arteriovenous malformations can influence higher the elevated blood pressure that can result ultimately in the hemorrhaging and the blood shunting. Yeah. Okay, next. So as I discussed earlier, the mode of inheritance. So HHT is an autosomal dominant disorder, and it occurs in autosomes. So, what are autosomes, right? So, autosomes are non-sex cells, and we know that humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes, and 22 pairs of chromosomes are non-sex or autosomes, and the last pair is the sex chromosome, so which is the composition of an X or Y gene, depending on if you are male or female. And the fact that the genetic disorder is dominant, it means, from Gregor Mendelian genetics, we know that the law of dominance dictates that a trait is dominant and over one another, and it is the dominant trait that is ultimately expressed. And in this case, because it is an autosomal dominant disorder, if you have one copy of the mutated HHT gene, it is going to be expressed. So only one copy of it is needed for you for you to inherit the disorder. So so if one of your parents have HHT, you have 50% of inheriting it. And following that logic, if you also have HHT, each of your children will have 50% of inheriting it. And so HHT compared to HHT is autosomal dominant disorder. So compared to autosomal recessive disorder, how they differ is that where here we only need one copy, autosomal recessive disorders need 2 copies of the mutant gene for it to be expressed. And if you have only one mutant gene, you are considered a carrier in autosomal recessive disorders. Okay. All right, yeah. So following this pattern, I pulled this from the pedigree homework assignment. So basically, as you can tell, squares represent males and circles represent females. And those that are affected, it's color coded. And this is the just a small representation of a possible lineage over successive generations. And as you can see from, for example, uh, let's take Ron and Kate, right? So because they're both affected, uh, and they have children, uh, George and Jason. Let's say, for example, George and Jason. Now, if both of them are affected, AA, right? If they're homozygous dominant, then 100% of their children are going to be, well, as we can do the simple cross, they're going to be homozygous dominant as well, because that's the only combination for it. So both of these, 100% of the children are going to be affected with the disorder. Whereas, if there's two heterozygous, as we know, that can result in a homozygous recessive. And like I discussed earlier, um, you know, where in autosomal recessive disorders, two copies of it are needed for it to be expressed. For an autosomal dominant, where if you have two copies of the recessive gene, or AA, it's lowercase aa, ultimately in autosomal dominant disorders, you're not going to have the disorder. So everything really just follows this sort of pattern. If you just look across the generations, the siblings, parents, they all follow this trend, and this is consistent with autosomal dominant disorder. Finally, options for genetic testing. So this is pretty straightforward. 80% who are clinically diagnosed with HHT are found to have a mutation in either the ENG type 1 or the ACVR2I1 gene type 2. And this comes as no surprise because, we talked about what are the mutations involved in HHT, and clinical studies are in data reflect this. So other testing options include HHT, which censor or include the HHT Center of Excellence, genetics counselor, or your primary care or PCP. And the price and the cost of testing options really vary on how much do you know about your family history. So if you already know somebody in your family or a relative has HHT, then obviously, because this is an inherited disorder, and moreover it's a autosomal dominant disorder, it's easier to assess the likelihood of you having the genetic disorder. So the price of that is going to be lower as if you were just completely out in the dark, and if any of your family or relatives had HHT, then that price range would be more lucrative, be a more lucrative process. So yeah, so that is my presentation for HHT. I hope that through understanding the characteristics, some history, prevalence, the cause, mechanism, and the mode of inheritance, it really kind of captures the essence of this genetic disorder. I hope that you guys learn a little bit of something of HHT. And these are my references, and that is gonna be the conclusion of my genetic disorder presentation. Thanks for watching.